right? So yeah, different activities, and then any feedback, things that you saw and you want to comment on. Let's brainstorm about what so we can do in a sequence as we went to the plots in Clarkston. Any comments or reflections on that field trip, and then what wants to be accomplished there? I guess that's so. Any comments or?
I thought it was really cool. I got to talk to I don't remember her name, but she was sharing how you guys count all of the plants and stuff, and so I thought that was really interesting. And I was thinking about how I could make a math connection and do a math lesson with it. So I'm going to be reaching out for some data so the high school students can use it. So get ready for an email.
We we could have used your help because we had about 4 different methods. And of course our plots are different sizes at each location. And so it was like now the Excel spreadsheet says exactly how each plot was like what method was but it's true. It's a great math.
And that even would be great, like the process of where you started and then what you did next to try to get better is great for them to see too, for problem solving and stuff. So yeah, it was really cool.
We'll talk.
So that's great. One of the things that we've been trying to do in this project that I think is unique relative to other projects that have been involved, like multi-state, and also the ones that we just had a meeting a month ago with all the national projects in that are multi-state and transdisciplinary, is the idea of integration, right? And hopefully, to me, that the thing that is becoming evident is how the synergisms, again, the different compartments of the project, like education, research, and extension. In many projects I've been involved, and the ones I saw a month ago on the national program, people tend to work in compartments. You just go do your thing, and then try to put all together in a meeting. But what I'm seeing here, is I think was evident in the education presentation yesterday. Is like people from education and interacting with people on research. You had extension publications interacting with extension, with Matt and Eric. Then we have people working on research and then interacting with these career videos. And so it's, I think we're achieving, and that what you just mentioned on that was clear to me that, so it's right there an education part component that is wondering about something that is done on research. So I think that's, I think we're accomplishing that unit that is more than just compartments, and hopefully creating something that is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So that's, and I think we're achieving this with this project. So we are relatively small relative to other projects, but I think at the same time that give us the opportunity to interact with each other, and then be, in all the levels of this program, how it's evolving into different fronts. So I think that's really, I think we're getting in there relative to what, like a year or a half ago when we had a previous meeting. So that's, I wanted to reflect on that. And then I don't know if any other comments on that first visit on the Clarkston.
I just wanted to ask, I know we don't have our actual NIFA representative, but perhaps you could just comment, Dr. Seibel, but how much leeway do we have to, if an advisory board member says, you really need to think also about deep winter and something like shrubs that wasn't included in our original plan, or we find a very rich area of research, but it's going to use some of the funding that we had originally intended for something else, like the metabolomics. There he is. Stefan contributes. So is NIFA open to us sort of rethinking things midway? Do you mind commenting? Since you're the closest thing we have.
Well, if I'm the closest, you're in trouble. But uh, I would say that NIFA is usually worried about very large reallocations of the budget. So if some of these changes required moving monies from one of the other functions, education extension, over to research, and that would raise red flags. I think NIFA understands, and it's probably healthy that midway there are things that you'd like to emphasize more than others. And but what I would always say is it's good to stay in contact with the MPL, with Amy. And so, don't get discouraged if you don't get a response to your first email. Just keep insisting, they'll respond. But I think they like to be in the know, without micromanaging, but of what's happening. But the short answer to your question, I think that's perfectly fine, and unless there are big reallocations of the budget. Yep.
Oh, you had a question.
I was, hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. I was just going to say that I really appreciated seeing all of the graduate students from different parts of the project, especially out in the field, talking about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I just think we should continue really highlighting the work that they're doing and give them opportunities to keep being part of this in a transdisciplinary way. So I just want to say that I loved hearing from all of you. Where's Sudhi today?
I think she's
Yeah. But yeah, she's out in the field. But I just want to say, I really like, that was one of the highlights for me, was, being up there in Richmond and out there. I'm in Clarkston, and I've heard Zubair talk, but but hearing all the other students and what they're doing and how they're involved in the project and what they're getting out of it, I think is so important.
To follow up on that, because you've been in multiple meetings, we have grad level grad students seminar that we run every once a month, and then the grad students actually take turns into organizing. Right now, it's, I think, Horacio in charge of organizing the monthly meetings. So they present to each other. So sometimes we bring a guest speaker. Sometimes we discuss some current issue, or we don't have any other presentations, or they practice their presentations at that. So that seminar, I think, is another way of keeping the project integrated across different levels, because have people from education, that attends the meetings, from extension, research. So that's a really good, and I think healthy way to also keep the program as a unit, as opposed to just being in compartments. So that's the presentations, I think, really helped on this. But this is something that is continuing. It's not just for this meeting. So it's really, really good. So any other comments? Yeah.
I want to add to what Catherine said, and also to emphasize the importance of this meeting on how important it is for that synergy between those three branches. In addition to the connection that Catherine made with Jennifer's work, Joey Kozlowski that you met yesterday, the bird guy, he has contacted me already, and I've talked to Eric and Dave about connecting with the birds. We've intentionally focused on smart foodscapes and what that means for pollinator conservation, particularly native bees. But this is an opportunity for us to branch out and to include more aspects of the project. So we can't do it all, but we started with a starting place, and now we have a very natural place to branch off. And another important aspect of that is our funding for elementary ends. So we're winding down with elementary. And by the way, for the education team, we worked with 3 teams of teachers. We scaled up, and now we're going back down. We worked with all 3 groups, which was a killer, but we made it. but he wants to work with us after the project. So they won't have additional funding from us, but of course we'll continue to support them. So we'll have some new lessons coming out on an aspect that's related to Dave and Eric's work, and that came out of this meeting. So it's worth the money, Juan.
So, and then any feedback from the advisory board? That's when I was put you on the spot. Now, so we've been talking about from the group, but any thoughts about either from education research or extension research? Anyone that wants to comment on what we saw yesterday, even beyond just the Clarkston, we can move into the Richmond. Sure.
So I'm not advisory board, but I have to cut out early. So I thought I'd say my piece and leave quickly. No, one of the things that was mentioned several times yesterday is assessing the ecosystem services of the smart foodscapes, and what's planned with the birds and pollinators. But I think quantifying that would be so important. With my Climate Hubs cap on, I appreciated Pablo's presentation yesterday, but I tried to listen to some of that as if I were a beef skeptic, and so I understand that to lower emissions, we have to emit more overall, but more or less. So I'm in the climate skeptic shoes. But how this project, how the smart foodscapes affect ecosystem services without developing a carbon tunnel vision, but there are other things that are happening as well, I think would be super important and super valuable. So those are my 2 cents. Yeah. Sorry, Pablo, I didn't mean to pick on you.
Thank you, Andres. Yeah, so that's when I think Dave is here. So that's one of the plans is to essentially quantify and measure the pollinators and birds in those islands. So that's something that we had, is coming down there now that we have plans established and starting to move into that step. So that, and it'll be great, to integrate that with education component. I think that'll be really something that started. I remember even when we were developing the proposal. So that's so. Yeah, Travis. For the Clarkston, okay, so that's
What time frame are you talking about? So what we've been doing up to this point is taking plant counts so that we wouldn't impinge on yield or establishment, which is continuing out there. In fact, I have a picture of something we think is fernleaf biscuit root, which is just a wisp after 3 years. But we're this year going to take yield data so that we can actually provide that for the what Jessica is doing, so that she can say, given that this is the yield, and then we are already starting, we started last year to collect data on the change in forage quality over time. So starting in June through October, what is the forage quality of the more productive species like alfalfa, small burnet, sandfoin, and then looking into why it's changing. Sandfoin tends to lose its leaves while alfalfa tends not to, that sort of thing. But I'm certainly open to input on needs. So if there are things that you think we could be doing that aren't included already, then that's why we're here, literally.
So scaling that up, I don't know if I need this. I have a pretty loud voice. What's that? Oh, sorry. So scaling that up, basically what you're doing now is seeing which plants fit the best. Uh-huh. And then I guess we just scale it up from there. That's the question, I guess, or the overall question that we've had a little bit on this is how do you scale this to landscape? And so I think I can see where the small plant plots are going. So thank you.
Kind of in conjunction with that is when we started this out, the species list. So from the survey, that was a question from even the ranchers, what my area is unique, the species, sainfoin, alfalfa, small burnet aren't necessarily going to perform in some of these low elevation winter ranges per se. Excuse me. And we've talked, natives and all of that, but it's a complex world in that world. And so I was just wondering, that idea of expanding species, we've talked from the beginning, shrubs, but also mixtures in these plots, the maintenance long-term, are there plans that way for any of expansion or looking at that? I know this short-term, it's only 5 years, so it's hard to look at it all, but what's ideas?
So you saw that there were a lot of areas at Clarkston that had essentially nothing growing in them. And so we haven't had the discussion, but I would certainly, actually, Matt was talking about the same kind of areas at Ephraim and suggesting some things that could be planted instead of just using Roundup to keep the weeds out. So I think there's an opportunity there, and we could prepare and then seed this fall and see how the mixtures, and I'd love to talk to you about what specifically we should try where. No, but you brought it up, so we need someone to give us that kind of input. So, and we did do a mixture of low growing legumes as our alleys when we planted in Panguitch last year. So I'm up for going ahead and using that space. Half the plant materials are coming along and half are not. So we don't want to preempt the fernleaf biscuit root, but aside from that, I think that would be a great use of that space. We've got it. We're there. We're counting. We're looking. So we might as well use it.
One other consideration just in your monitoring is the maintenance is always been a concern in my mind of single species plantings, and just maybe, keeping track of weed pressures within those plots would be maybe a good thing to do as well, if you're not already, just knowing what it's going to take to maintain these on the landscapes. So
yeah, we've been focused on trying to keep the weeds away rather than just letting it rip, and I don't know how else to do that. Well, or just, but the reason for the monocultures is just so that we can track a given species as a baseline. So
I think building off this idea, so is there a plan to move this to an active pasture with where you roll it out the way you would expect to roll it out, on a real landscape? Because I know this stage was finding the species. Richmond is that, okay.
Yeah, about scale, the way I envision this for, large landscapes is the idea of having allotments, where you see legumes, maybe, 2, 3, or 4 legumes. And then if that modeling that Pablo showed yesterday, that so we can have cows graze on those allotments, at a really large scale for say a few days, and then move them to the sea of grass or to range, and then so create rotations that are really monthly or month and a half rotations from legumes to or improve rangeland to this to grass, and then back similar to the way that this producer is doing it now at a smaller scale. I think he's using like 80, 90 pairs, right, that he has grazing on under a pivot for about 10 days, and then the animals are grazing for the full summer on rangeland, and then they come back. So I think that approach that is already it's been actually proven to be viable. I think you can probably move on those larger scales that they still, you can still see that checkboard of legumes across the landscape looked from a from space, that you can get still that checkboard that you see at Richmond, but then expanded to each of those islands representing pastures that are moving, the animals are moving across. I don't know, that's if there's something that you think might work or
So in our current study design, we don't have the resources, or we hadn't intended to go to like a ranch scale project. So we have the demonstration sites, all of which are in pastures that producers are using for a fall grazing approach. So that's a first attempt. There is one of the sites in Nephi that the producer's custom grazing on basically a crested wheatgrass monoculture in the fall. So I found the site, I found a producer. It's just funding on the next step. So he's curious to see, we've got 2 plots on his place that, given the rain we've had, we're hopeful that they show up. So that's the place that I think there is opportunity to expand if it works, if he sees the value. Because he, again, like Spencer, he called me saying, hey, I'm trying to get some forbs into this crested wheatgrass. I said, oh, if I got a deal for you, right? So, but it's 2,000 or 3,000 acres worth of, so there's opportunities, but I guess that'll be on the back end of all of this before we can move to that scale.
I have a comment about the education side of the project. That's what I'm more familiar with. First of all, I'm really, really impressed with what's going on and what's happening with the curriculum. And one of the things that struck me yesterday is how very important it is that you all are emphasizing STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics together. It's so important to integrate. And this struck me when we were in the Bird Guys classroom yesterday, and up on the wall was their daily schedule. And I computed, they have 2 hours and 10 minutes for reading and writing every day, an hour and 10 minutes for math, and 35 minutes for science. So if you don't integrate all those subject areas together, then it's just a way to inch more science into that. And I'm a science educator, so yeah, that's like my first love and my first thing I'm concerned about. So I'm just really happy that you all are integrating and you're approaching it that way to get that science. I'm also very impressed that the kindergartners know vocabulary like forb and legume, and the ornithology. That's stuff that I didn't learn until college. So it was all just really amazing and impressive.
Since we're on the education theme, I'll go ahead and talk too. But on a personal level, as an environmentalist and a beef eater, I'm really excited to see the work that you all that are doing with reducing environmental impact of beef production. So that's helps me feel better personally. But professionally, the work that the education team is doing is outstanding. Just, seeing it implemented in the school was amazing. And I really want to see a concerted effort at getting that information disseminated, because I helped start the first rural elementary charter school in New York State. They would thrive on this curriculum materials, just the places that other schools need to go. The integration, like Sarah was talking about, New York State is no different. 3 to 4 hours of class time is spent on reading and math. So getting science in is very rare. In fact, I had my pre-service teacher say, "Why do we have a science methods course? We never see science." So, getting that in there. So a website that's, easy to navigate so that we can, get those PD resources out, that you're developing the modules, so that the teachers can learn how to do this, because that's an issue as well. They need support to be able to implement this. And also, that I'm excited to see the research that you're showing about the STEM identity that's coming from the way you've designed your curriculum. And I was talking with, I think it was Eric and a few others, about the need for kids wanting to go into extension type jobs, that they're not getting in USDA jobs as well. And hopefully that will help with those career opportunities as well down the road. But I just, we want to see those lesson plans. I want to see those resource sheets. And I think, another avenue with getting it into the schools would be to get it to the pre-service educators like Sarah and myself, so that we can help get it disseminated as well. But having those available would be perfect.
Anybody else? Advisory? I guess that's it. Advisory members?
Comment on the education, since the education's up, and I was really impressed, like the curriculum you guys have come up, and the focus on the general connection to natural world and that. And this may sound like a criticism, but it's more of just a question. There was a lot of focus on ologists and science and that part of it. And was there consideration for in the process the connection to the food commercial side of it, the production, farm agriculture, the scientists, the STEAM part of it that isn't necessarily have ologists behind it, and the careers and that part of it?
That is an excellent point and an astute observation. We've videoed 5, and all 5 of those were ologists, including Juan and Jennifer and Eric, but Eric is in extension. So his is going to focus on the application so it's more practical application. And we've talked about including a rancher in our series. So we'll take that feedback, and I think it's really important for them to think broadly about the applications of STEAM. Yeah, we did start with our scientist team and across extension, and Dave's going to be doing a video for us with extension. But I think it's a point well taken to look at more practical applications for kids. The main thing is we need the kids to see themselves as the folks who are in STEM careers. So we have a very diverse group of folks working here. And we're also including teachers, because we were remiss in thinking about applications of STEM. So some people choose to go into the hard sciences, as we sometimes call them. And then some of us who were good in science and mathematics chose to go into education. So we're going to include education as a pathway too. But we definitely will work on that. Thank you for the suggestion.
Any comments or? So yeah, I want to also mention that one of the efforts of the project, I don't think we talk about this, is trying to get students from high schools interested into rangeland science and natural resources. So we are partnering with our College of Natural Resources with internships. So we have a program where we're recruiting 2 student interns from high school into getting hands-on experiences by helping grad students. Well, and then we had a couple last summer. The plan is to have another couple this summer so that they get engaged into natural resources and then apply for, of course, our college on so that's I think that's another effort that we can try to get more students interested into the field, and then not only integrating kids that are in the middle or elementary or high school, but also moving them into college by learning by doing, right? So that's kind of the idea. And then we had really successful 2 candidates that went through the project last summer, and I think they helped pretty much like a undergrad student, right? And then one liked it so much that is coming back to the program, and then we have a new one coming. So that's the plan, and hopefully we are working with the college to actually expand that recruitment for high school students. Yeah.
One of the synergies that came out of what Juan just said, we have an amazing group of teachers down at Carbon High School, and they're in the technical sciences. So they're in ag science teachers, but they're really excellent science teachers and math teachers too. So they truly are a dream team, and they're going to work with us on mapping the curriculum this summer. But we've been talking about next steps on what we might do next. Not that we don't have enough work to do right now, but thinking about next steps and maybe additional funding, hint, hint to the USDA people, but thinking about there's a really extensive program with dual enrollment courses. So one way to get kids to enter into agricultural sciences is to have them take courses in high school that are intriguing to them and to let them see their opportunities. You heard Larry talking about, he lived in Kansas. He'd never been to the ocean when he decided he wanted to be an oceanographer. That was because of Boy Scouts and because he was a lifeguard at the pool. So, thinking about ways that he can see opportunities. So if we can work with these teachers and perhaps develop some dual enrollment courses. So what that means is we'd work with the College of Natural Resources and work with the teachers and develop some courses for the high school teachers to teach, and they get dual credit for high school graduation and at college. So what that does is, number one, they get hooked in with Utah State, and also that would be available to other universities too, to use those courses, and then to act as a pathway into that particular area of STEM.
So just to build on that idea a little bit, across the country, there's a movement called STEM Ecosystems Community of Practice. I don't know if you heard of it, but there are these hubs that are forming, and they're in different locations. Sometimes they're in universities, but they're these groups of people that come in these hubs that come from all different walks of life. That's part of the purpose. So they have business people, all different kinds of stakeholders. And then you bring all the educational people in, and it's a way to try and think about how can we provide opportunities for kids at multiple points in their lives in multiple locations over time. So that's what it takes to develop a STEM identity. It's not a one-time thing where you have a guest speaker come into your classroom. And we can't necessarily think that the parents are going to take them to all these science activities all the time, right? Some parents do, but a lot of them don't, or they don't have access. So it's to try and create this, that's why they call it an ecosystem, these multiple points. So this project is contributing to really an ecosystem of creating multiple points for kids to have these experiences over time. Now, it hasn't worked out exactly like we had envisioned in the beginning, but we had hoped that the elementary, middle, and high schools were kind of line up so that they would have gardens. And as they went through, they would have multiple experiences, right? Over time with this curriculum. That's the idea. And that's then how then they'll get to high school and say, oh, I've been doing that in school. I'm interested in these dual enrollment classes. But we realized from the research that this is what it takes to get kids interested in STEM. See, it's a big effort. It's going to take a lot of coordination. Yeah.
I was just going to add to Juan's high school range comment that Utah for about 60 years has held a Utah high school range camp that's been sponsored by the Society of Range Management. And that takes about 20 to 25 high school students every year, takes them down. It's been in southern Utah, but it's a 5-day camp. And so they go down and they learn everything range related. So they do monitoring and transects and plant identification, and they actually have to have a plant, like they have a plant collection that they have to collect 25 species and label them, and they take a plant test and they learn a lot of the things about AUMs and what would be asked on the CDE, which is a FFA career development event, basically. So they go and they have a big day that they kind of compete with other schools across Utah. 2 years ago, I was approached by one of the teachers and said, I wish that we had this for teachers because we don't know anything about range and we're trying to teach these kids. So last year, we actually held our first ag teacher range camp at Bear Lake. It was 3 days. We had 18 people come, but we had 5 down from the Zuni Reservation in New Mexico that were actually Native Americans who were hired to do range management but had no range management background. And so that's, I've also found out, is a huge thing, but a problem, I guess. But so yeah, we're going to continue doing the range camp for ag teachers this year, and I've actually started reaching out to some of the universities and working with the ag education programs so that the teachers that are coming in, like the students that are undergraduates going into ag ed, are being invited to these camps just so we can kind of give them a background in range and give them a little bit of a taste of it. And then we're hoping that if we can kind of get them excited about it, then they'll teach their kids and kind of get them excited about it and get them participating in the events and looking for options in range management. So we get some, yeah. We get some kids like from Logan that don't have, there's a team from Logan, there's a team from Smithfield that both compete, that kids that really don't have much of an ag background at all, that just kind of liked plants. And so they liked the plant ID part. And so then it kind of brought them into the range side of things.
So this is something I've talked a little bit with Kathy about, but hearing you talking about the ecosystem and multiple points of contact, within Extension, we also have this incredible 4-H program that we've just got to figure out how to team that up, because if you had kids introduced to, within school and then had summer activities that were available in their local community, because 4-H is nationwide. I mean, most counties, right, Matt, have 4-H coordinators. So to me, that's a natural fit between these two worlds that would help. I hadn't thought about it in terms of multiple points of contact. So that's really impactful. But for example, we now have one that's structured around wild horses. It's called Mustang Camp. We've tried to target urban youth that don't have exposure to, we take them out and they see horses and they learn plants and they learn how much grass a horse can eat and why the concerns about too many horses in these fragile desert ecosystems. And so we've run about 50 kids this summer through that program over the last. So those are the types of things that it seems like it'd be a natural fit to go from your elementary and even high school age kids that go into the FFA and then the 4-H on the elementary side. So we'll have to think about that.
Just going to say a quick thing about the funding question. And Juan and I have been talking about other AFRI priorities that might be a good fit for a follow-on project. There's a another CAP project in the Plains area that also has a very, they're almost wrapping it up now, but that has a very strong and well integrated education and extension component. And they applied for an AFRI program that funds partnerships between the climate hubs and extension, basically, and they're building on that. And they got funded. They're building on that and sort of amplifying the successes that they had for their CAP grant. So I've shared with Juan some of the details, but there are opportunities to do that. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So Eric, so not that any of us are looking for more work, but and I'm delighted to hear, like, for the teacher workshops, that's week long, because it's not a one afternoon one off. You've got the consistency, and that's very research based. The one thing that we would love to do to talk to you about is to work together on some lessons that you do in the camp that we could include in the curriculum that would be a natural connection, because you're working with 24 kids, and which is awesome and life-changing for those kids. But we could make those experiences available to teachers across the nation and make those strategic connections. Yes. Yes. But we can work together. We can name that tune. But for the lessons, and then also for the teacher professional development modules, because those teachers really like those now, because they're self-paced and they can pick and choose what they feel the need for at that time.
And so teachers were able to just spend those 3 days. I think it was like $100 we charged basically, but it covered all their food, their lodging, and then the credit and a half or whatever we offered them. So, but I was kind of thinking about Eric's gardening thing too. And like Extension has this amazing program called Master Gardeners. Like, how hard would it be to create a junior Master Gardeners that it's already there in some counties? Yeah. Is there? Yeah, they're definitely not like.
You know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, people kind of know in the background about some of these things, but they don't like see them doing it for some reason. Like there needs to be like a bridge, right? So hopefully doing it in schools where you have all the kids, that's the idea. You have all the kids in school, right? 85% of children in the United States are in public schools. Believe it or not, people think they hear about homeschools and all these other kinds of schools, but still 85% of them are still in public schools. So you get it in the public schools, you're hitting 85% of the kids in the country. So,
And our target audience is to include informal educators too, like at botanical gardens and like at, I don't know, museums, those kinds of places. And one other comment, Extension has been so awesome in terms of helping us to provide multiple points of entry for teachers to find the resources. So they're putting our resource sheets on the 4-H website and then also on the Extension website. And we've been trying to work with Ag in the Classroom, which is located right here at Utah State, the national. So and that's USDA funded too. So great partnerships.
What we find in 4-H is we can get all the kids we want. It's the volunteer leaders. So we're based out of volunteer leadership. And so finding a club leader in these areas is what is the sticking point. But once you find a good club leader, it's a natural transition because they can do this junior master gardener program and have curriculum going all year long. And then they're taking that produce to the county fair and being recognized for it. So it's another level that can be there, but the help needs to find the good, solid volunteer that wants to take on a summer group of kids. So.
one last thing really quick. I started thinking about those undergrads that are coming through an education program. Would there be, because again, I think a lot of times it's helping the teachers or the people that will become teachers be exposed to this, seeing how it would fit in a classroom. Would a summer camp or some sort of 2-week short course for educators in that last year of their program, number one, is a room, would there be interest? You see what I'm saying? To get them some early exposure before they get into their career path. Is that a good place? I don't know if intervention's the right word, but
And also doing those modules online. So doing it for the teachers face to face, that of course is best, but they can't all get there. So then we work together on those modules.
So we're developing these online modules. The PD we're developing is it's a new way of approaching PD. We'll see how it goes. So we're using something called Nearpod. I don't know if anyone's used that here. And we're developing these online PD modules using Nearpod that people can do by themselves. A facilitator can take it and do it with a group of teachers, or you could do the old-fashioned PD where you sit in a room and do it face-to-face. They could be used all three ways. And that's kind of the way things are going, so that you're using technology to provide PD at multiple levels for multiple different types of people who have multiple different types of needs. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with doing the PD this way versus the other ways professional development has been done. But I think getting it into pre-service teacher education is a good point, Eric, and I think it's critical. And I'm going to let Beth talk to that because she works with a lot of pre-service teachers in New York.
Yeah, my small institution prepares more teachers than any other college in the Northeast. And we only have 7,000 students in our whole campus. So a lot of teachers at my school. But yeah, what I have found with undergraduate pre-service teachers is for summer, they want online instruction so they can work, to pay for school. So having these online modules would be helpful. To do that with, I think. But then getting the faculty like myself and Sarah and Rita and Kathy to integrate those modules in person when we have them in our classes, and then also work with our science colleagues that they have required science courses they have to take as elementary teachers to implement them as well. So with my methods course, for example, it's nature-based. So we're outside, my students do nature journals. We have a garden on campus. They work with the child care center. All that kind of thing is a component. But then if they were to get some of this other information, likewise. So I think that's really important. But you're right, having it in pre-service is really important so that they start to feel comfortable. And there's a lot of research in outdoor and environmental ed that teachers will not take their kids outside if they're not comfortable themselves. So they have to get it. So, incorporating outdoor education into our pre-service instruction is very critical to making sure they do that.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. It's kind of like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. If they don't learn it in their pre-service career, they start their in-service career and they're very overwhelmed with just being a new teacher and everything else they have to do. And anecdotally, I've had students email me when they become teachers and they had their own classrooms, and they'll say, Dr. Haynes, thank you so much for showing me how to do this outside. I took my students stream sampling, and if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have known how to do this or wouldn't have had the time to learn. It's a lot harder if you try to approach the in-service. They do need to get it in the pre-service.
Okay, so any more comments on this topic or? Okay, so I have another question on our plots. Yes, so which species you would recommend for us to seed on that area where we don't have anything coming from that versus trefoil? I think we seeded like 4 times already or 5, I don't know how many times. So it doesn't work for sure. So So what about plantain was one of Pablo's. So, and then I think Jennifer, you have some issues with, there's some problems with plantain, but that's
Yeah, we did a study with Forbes as binary mixtures with a number of either grasses or legumes. So we had 22 grasses and legumes, and plantain was one of 12 Forbes that we looked at in mixtures, and it was one that stayed in. So of the Forbes, similar to the kinds of things that we have at Clarkston, but different species. There were only 4 that thrived. One was flax that the cows just simply didn't like that well. And then small burnet was one, plantain was one, but it never got big. It doesn't in the environment. So I have a colleague in Pennsylvania who, you can grow it in the greenhouse. It's wonderful, but you put it outdoors and it just doesn't thrive. And that was Pennsylvania. We found the same thing here, and that was under irrigated conditions. And I was curious to ask you, I cannot now remember how many different species you have in your visionary new pastures, the diversity ones. It's like 60 or something, but doesn't that dilute the effect of any one bioactive chemical?
Very, very good question. And in answer to the plantain thing, it may be that plantain loves New Zealand, or we've seen that in Argentina, and Balcarce works quite well as well, which is quite similar to New Zealand in several ways. So in New Zealand, when you get it going, pretty much you can't get rid of it, like a weed. So I don't know exactly. I'm not a plant scientist, but I don't know why it wouldn't work here. To be honest with you, I don't know. Or other species. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Could be. So. Oh, yeah. And yeah. Well, so forget about the plantain. But we found that there are sometimes that cows like it, and sometimes the cow don't like it. It's easy in a dairy farm or when you do intensive grazing management, because you just set the cows there. Is that you eat it or you eat it, yeah, till you get hungry. Yeah. The rationale behind plantains because got a cumin and other plant secondary chemical compounds that induce diuresis and also hold into the nitrogen. So that's the main thing. So another species that I thought of that one was red clover. If it worked here or not, there are some new varieties of red clover. It's perennial, yeah, yeah. What we found out with our red clovers in our mixtures is once you get it there and you just let it reseed easily, and it became kind of a permanent feature in the pasture. Last but not least, in the farm, instead of monocultures, we created 3 strips of. One is a multi-species with 7 or 8 species, forbs, legumes, different legumes and grasses, mainly fescues. It's working really well, but the way we are seeing is we may go back to monocultures. We've seen better responses in the animals with monocultures rather than mixtures, and it would be easier to maintain a monoculture from a wheat point of view. What is working really well is the crimson clover and chicory, although there are 2 biennials. But in those strips, we are ideally, well, today we try chicory, and tomorrow we try fennel, those plants with greater plant secondary chemical compounds there, quite strong, if you like. Yeah. What we also have seen in the ryegrass, white clover strip, which enable us to renew the pastures, or create choice faster for all the animals, because we replace or reseed or replant half of the pasture at the time. So we leave in 50 to 40% of the ryegrass, white clover. When we reduce nitrogen inputs there, we see that lucerne, red clovers, other grasses start to appear, and we are doubting whether to touch them or not, because it became a really rich, diverse pasture. Yep. Yeah. Well, we go into to the other direction, mainly with the strip monocultures there. We were trying these strips of mixtures, but I think we are gonna go back to strip of monocultures. Some of them with different main plant secondary chemical compounds, rather than have a mixed salad, if you like. Yep.
I would say about the dilution, I think, I would argue that having a bit of a variety of plants is a good idea, because you would see that some compounds might be present in one plant but completely absent in others. So if you have at least a few plants to select from, you're going to get a wider variety of phenolic metabolites for the animal, and it's most likely going to benefit their health. So there's a dilution effect, but I'd say if you have to choose between just getting maybe 30 compounds from a specific plant, or getting a little bit less but 60 compounds from two different plants, I'd say that's okay. Yeah, well, I think that's also a good idea, because there's a lot of overlap too between plants in certain compounds. But your question is if you get the same compound from 60 different plants, or yeah. 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 Yeah, well, the thing though is, I'd say a lot of these compounds, they all kind of work. They work on similar pathways, so there's a lot of overlap, even if it's a different phenolic. I mean, what makes an antioxidant is that they all have a phenol group, right? So they all would, and all these plant secondary compounds have that. So they do have certain overlap in the sense that they're antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer. Maybe their actions are slightly different, but there's also a large overlap of redundancy there. So in terms of, like, let's say if one of the compounds gets diluted a little bit, but another compound comes up, it can be likely that both of them have anti-tumor effects. Not to say that eating meat from that per se reduces your risk of cancer, but if you throw these compounds on a cell line, you would see anti-cancer effects, and you see that in both compounds. So even though they're different compounds, if they act on similar pathways, so I'm not that worried about the dilution effect. I actually think having a little bit of a greater variety of compounds is actually going to be better, because they can act. They may have the same end result, being anti-cancer, but if they act on also similar pathways, but also slightly different pathways, I think you can get a better effect. At least from what we've seen, is that the meat that is the highest in the these antioxidant compounds, or these phenolic compounds that have potentially medicinal effects, they're typically have the animals that have access to a wide variety of compounds. Yeah. I- Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing of kind of fisher is like that. Let's say kale in the human diet is a very healthy vegetable to eat. But if and it has many medicinal properties or anti-cancer properties, but if it's all we could eat, I'd say would be not as healthy as we could select from maybe 30 different vegetables. And I and yeah, and yeah, to undo the ice cream. That's right. So no, but so kind of fish is like that, and I think it's just the cow is just another mammal. It's nothing. Yeah. 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 Well, I'm more so saying like if you feed me kale as my only vegetable day in and day out, I'd probably not be great for me. But if you let me select from different 30 different plants, I'd be better able to nourish myself more like because and even though the compounds in kale are very healthy, but the compounds in onions are so too. And if we sort of think about that for the cow as well, we see similar. It doesn't mean that, well, at least what we found so far in the data is that there's sort of diminishing return. It's not like 60 plants is better than 10, but 5 is better than 1. Yeah.
Yeah, some of that interactions is really interests me from a long time. What Jennifer is mentioning on, maybe interactions that are antagonistic and some that are synergistic or some that they don't, like Stefan says, they're just additive. And there's a lot to learn, but we found, for instance, that some secondary compounds, they is the same as medicines, right? So if you take different medicines, you can have antagonisms. So sometimes it may happen that, and we saw that with saponins and tannins, for instance, that they antagonize for their antiparasitic effects. So you get a much stronger antiparasitic action from tannins when they're alone than when they are consumed with saponins from alfalfa, for instance. And then in other situations, you get synergisms like you see on medicines, that they try. So I think that's a really, really interesting field that I don't think has been explored to the extent that it deserves, because you may get, in medicine study antagonisms with medicines, right? So it's the same idea, but with secondary compounds, there's not much known. We know about a few things, and the same will be with the antioxidant activity, or I'm guessing with or potentially being too, as we talked yesterday, maybe being too much, an antioxidant becoming a pro-oxidant if you eat too much of, like people do with they try to load themselves with antioxidants. So it's yeah. So in some cases, I think you can get antagonisms or too much of the same thing, and others maybe. But in general, what we see on animals is that they tend to harvest a diverse diet that is really and that's been shown even from primates or even humans to ruminants, that they tend to select a diverse diet, that diversity is helping them despite those antagonisms. I think that they still they especially with, and that's the question here, with the plants that we're trying to get in these islands, is that, well, how we can design those like we are doing with the cows, right? So how we design these different forages that instead of antagonizing actually synergize, right? That's kind of the and then we found evidence with tannins that there may be some synergisms, like we have on the sandfoin tannins and hydrolyzable tannins from small brunette, that they actually are synergistic for, say, nitrogen retention. Or trefoil was another one. So that's what we tried. So as we learn more about, and that's what Fernanda, well, I don't think she's is trying to do these combinations. She's planning combinations of different legumes, so to see which one is more effective at reducing, in this case, methane. So she's, creating these combinations of grass with legumes, and then mixing multiple legumes and seeing which ones are more effective at cutting methane. So that was the next step, is trying to get that functionality, was you talked yesterday, that functionality into the, in this case, of methane or nitrogen. Well, she's looking at nitrogen too, so that you get a combination of legumes that actually is better utilized by the animal, say trefoil and sandfoin, that if you just have sandfoin alone. So that functionality, I think that also needs a lot of way more research.
That functionality and again the arrangement in space of all those species, especially when you got dairy cows or animals that are quite demanding and you have high stocking densities, and physically they just eat it all at the same time. When it's all that mixed salad, it's like well, I give you a spoon instead of a fork. You can select, and plus those cows are really demanding. They just eat, and maybe that complexation occurs or antagonisms occurs rather than offer them in a very discrete patches that they can in time say, okay, now I'm eating this one, later on I have a meal of the other one, so they can conform what the exactly. So from an island point of view, and we were talking this morning about virtual fencing, you can have islands with different monocultures, if you like, or two, and combine it in time. Okay, well, and you jump from the grass to the lucerne, from the lucerne to the sandfoin, and just arrange it with a sequence there. Yeah. But we have those sequences with one of the experiment with Kona Garrett, and they really arrange it in time. When we offer the choice of 3 times a day, they literally have a particular sequence which differ amongst all the animals.
Yeah,
but
that's
they
what we try to
definitely-
give them
yeah.
strips. Yeah, that's the idea, to give
Yeah.
them strips so they can choose. Yeah.
So not to complicate this more, but when you talk about diversity, this is all about animal diet selection on the livestock end, but on the ecological side, that diversity matters a ton. So I would always be in favor of 60 over 2, because in terms of an ecological system, the more diversity you have, plants that are going to do better under different small changes in precipitation, temperature, which then creates stability and resilience in a system to disturbance. So it's kind of the complexity, because we can focus on, well, we want these tannins and these compounds, right? But then even as you add wildlife to the mix, that diversity creates more opportunities for a broader diversity of both animal species and insects. And so for stability of ecosystems, I'm always going to go with more diversity rather than less. So it's kind of the complexity that the whole of the project, right? Because we've got all of those aspects being covered by the projects. We can't just think about, oh, this is really important, right? We also have to think about, well, how are wildlife going to interact, pollinators, and then that diversity where it matters across the landscape. So, oh, well, here, Chris had her hand up first, and then
Just building on that, if you were just trying to get tannin, these certain compounds, why wouldn't you just put it into a feed additive? It seems that part of the point of having these islands is also having an effect on the ecology. And so therefore you would need more diversity than just probably a monoculture.
Well, I would just say that we have to remember that our main goal is to provide protein. And so we have to have high yielding plants that are high in protein as kind of a starting place. But I think the resource islands can also be used for multi-species plantings, that can be something that even these plant species that take a couple or 3 years to start to flower can be included. But as I think the main purpose still has to be the protein and then therefore high yielding, high protein plants as the sort of basic part of the island.
Variety of plants, and then what if you plant a wide variety of plants that are fairly, like Jennifer says, very high in protein, that reasonably know the animals would graze, and then if you plant 15 and 7 come up, then great, right? And then at least you had your bets a little bit, I think. What do you think? Yeah, like a mix. Yeah, or not? Or has that been a bit of an issue for you, Pablo, or not? Or has that been an issue for you? Because you said you're moving more towards like monoculture strips, or? Yeah. And step up, and the other ones don't. So that's why you not only want diversity, but redundancy as well. There to cope with that or give the system a little bit more resiliency there. So rather than trial and error, this one, no, this one, you just throw a bunch of them and say, well, these are the ones that are actually thrive in for whatever reason. That could be an alternative there. Yeah. And all of these plants will have some sort of medicinal value as well. Yeah, away from monoculture, you throw some legumes and forbs on there, you're all. I mean, they're going to have slightly different compounds, but they're all going to be healthy and have medicinal effects and antioxidant effects of the animal and properties for the so yeah, this is kind of like same like us again. And if we don't eat broccoli, we can still be pretty damn healthy.
So I'm just going to complicate this issue a little bit. This sounds all fine and dandy, and that's the easiest way to plant is put 15 plants in a row, but they compete against each other. If you want true diversity and you look at you model the landscape doesn't put everything in one spot. It puts patches of chaise brush here, patch of rabbit brush there. And so if you want to model what a landscape's going and the diversity in the landscape, you might have some monocultures. They'll just be spread out across the landscape in the place they're most fitting. And that's probably why some of our seed species fail, is because the most competitive ones pop up first and take the space and other resources that are needed for the other ones. So, but it's not economical to do it that way. It does make it a little easier though to manage sometimes, because you don't have to, you can manage a single species across the landscape sometimes a little easier.
But I guess that's why we plant mixture, right? Because we expect those species to self-select to which one's going to grow in that monoculture in that spot. Because trying to prioritize the landscape to will this species grow right here, that's a lot of legwork. So it's almost a cheaper effort to put the 15 species there that the one survives. I'm just saying.
Right. So if you plant out 15 species to figure out where on a particular landscape each species wants to be, but then go back and replant in the species that are surviving, and then have patchy monocultures across the landscape. So you get a diversity, which I think is what we're looking for on the ecological side, and not just a single monoculture of one species across the whole landscape. Maybe we're getting closer to achieving what we're all looking for.
I'm going to get on my scale box, because when you think about diversity, you also have to think about it at scale, right? So we can have a monoculture here, but if you have multiple patches, because again, plants often self-select for particular soils. So we also have to think about the diversity across, landscapes, especially in rangelands. When we're irrigating, we have more flexibility about where and how things show up. But anyway, I think we beat it pretty hard.
Just want to make a comment and there, our experience. We first went with the conventional soil analysis, and we find out that our farm was pretty even. And so good for an experimental point of view. That's fantastic. You can get better. But then we went to radiometric analysis, and we found multiple different patches with multiple different properties that could enable us to think now, okay, maybe we need to not only have a different arrangement of species for those particular patches, but different grazing management of that. And just, I think I'm gonna put him on the spot here to Richard. He haven't talked much about that. So Richard, because Richard is, we were talking about diversity and how to locate particular things in particular spaces at particular time to enhance ecosystem services. So I think it would be good if we can give Richard 5 minutes to explain what he has done from a GIS point of view and his model to enhance ecosystem services, because one of the next steps with us is to how we can use his model for this sort of island arrangement in rangelands in the world. Yeah.
Pablo, typical Pablo, putting. Here I was getting comfortable. A slight warning. That was good actually. That was 10 seconds. That's better than usual. So those, I think you know that I come from an architectural background, so I love listening to this discussion and this topic, and I'm really fortunate to have landed in Pablo's Center of Excellence, which is based on these kinds of discussions. But I do take a slightly more clinical and spatial view of things, and I look at farm design as if I was looking at an architectural plan where you're moving around components in the landscape, different kinds of pasture, trees especially, water sources, and human elements as well, like roads and buildings. And the way we configure those around has a big effect on regulating ecosystem services, whether it's in regulating ecosystem services are things like pollination, protection of water supply, purification of water, stabilization of the landscape. So it's these mechanisms of nature which we rely upon and which are going to be essential for climate adaptation. And so what my PhD's been about is using GIS, which is basically, if you don't know, it's a mapping system called Geographic Information Systems. Looking at those components and how we move them around, like on a plan, on an architectural plan, but how we configure those trees can have markedly different effects on the performance of ecosystem services. And from a big picture point of view, and I'm apologize, I'm more of a future thinker. I think sort of 20 years, 50 years down the track. I don't have any solutions for the challenges facing farmers in the short term, but I do see as we're moving from the Holocene, which is this period of stability of around about 60 degrees Fahrenheit that humans have enjoyed for the last 12,000 years, and where agriculture has been predominantly associated with production of food. As we go into the Anthropocene, which is the period we're entering now, which is where the Earth systems are directly impacted by human activities. I see farming as taking on a different role than just on food production, and it'll be very much a very spatially effective way of producing these ecosystem services, which we will come, which cities and urbanization will come to rely on. So I kind of see the future of farming as sort of being reborn as a mechanism for producing these ecosystem services. And believe it or not, farmers will get paid for those eventually. It's absolutely the economic systems that we have at the moment. Unless you start bringing natural capital into that equation, inflation is just going to keep on increasing. So inevitably, we'll have to face the fact we have to bring in natural capital into these equations, and payment for ecosystem services is how that will happen. And farmers will play an incredibly important role in that. So my work is about how do you design farms to produce these ecosystem services. Research shows that if you enhance these ecosystem services, the other things will follow, like productivity, like provisioning ecosystem services and cultural ecosystem services. But you've got to get those regulating ecosystem services sorted out and functioning and maximized. So that's basically what I've been looking at. Is there any questions or any, or do you want me to talk about anything else, Pablo?
One of the comments about the trees, that was all we've done that, okay, let's say, well, we put a 1 hectare of farm. Is that the same that?
Yeah, look, if you have let's say you have 15 acres, a paddock of 15 acres, and you want to put in 1 acre of trees. If you put that in a big clump, or if you divide that 1 acre of trees into smaller clumps, you're going to get markedly different ecosystem services. And depending on where you are, if the ecosystem service that could be demanded might be the cooling effect of trees, or it might be the provision of a specific species of bird. All these configurations do different things. And my modeling showed that, the way you break up that 1 acre of trees provides markedly different results from the ecosystem service that you're looking for. And then the trick is, if we want to be multifunctional, what are the optimum arrangements of those trees that do a whole lot of different things, like cooling, like protection from floods, like providing a specific habitat for birds.
So can you comment at all on perhaps an optimal design for resource islands, the number of species, monoculture strips, and, are there like a garden of other things?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to take those islands and use them as those components, break them into smaller parts or bigger parts, and then see what the model tells us about how they could be configured in the landscape. And then what I'm trying to look at the moment is how do we combine my model with foraging theory? Like how does animal behavior fit in spatially so that we can optimize a landscape for optimum foraging, for optimum yield from the animal, production from the animal, but also meet these other ecosystem services at the same time. That's sort of the next step I want to get to, and that's going to be pretty challenging, but I think achievable from an architectural approach point of view. Hi.
Yeah, I think it's really important also to, as Richard is saying, figure out the spatial, or how much we use in the whole, in different scales. And also one thing that I think it's important is mention the part as Suber and Jessica is doing, that there's people that's going to implement this, and not all people will be wanting to do this. It's all, we have to figure out a simplicity to do it, because as Super mentioned, there's people that have other jobs, they don't have time, they don't have other people working, they have employees or whatever, so they have to figure out a way how to implement this to be simple and also to be sustainable. If they don't get anything, if they don't get money out of this, they probably won't do it. So that's also just going back to the basis, the producers talking in money most of the time. So
I'm so sorry, Horacio, but I don't agree with you at all. Uh, but we went through that, and New Zealand went through that to the simple thing. We can't fix a computer with a hammer nowadays. I think I agree what you're doing. You're making money, so it's okay, but may not be the important thing, as Richard said. When we get into the Anthropocene, technology now, as we are talking, the wearables in the animals, so the computational agroecology will help us to deal with that complexity. Like you brought Juan. We don't need to fall into the trap of that parsimonious model. We need to use more complex models that enable us to deal with complexity of the systems, diversity, redundancy, and all of that. How we can make the life simple for the farmer that got another job now, right? Just okay, he ranch, but in the afternoon he go and do something else. In Australia now, there are some dairy farms that are robotic dairy farms, and that enable the farmers to have an extra income because they have more time. So, and I think, and we've been seeing that how we can improve adoption of people in the rangelands of China and Inner Mongolia as well. Technology will help to make complexity manageable for the people to have a simpler life. So I don't think I'm contradicting you. You may have gone to that way, somehow make the life simple for a farmer or a rancher to have a good quality of life, to go fishing, to enjoy their kids, but embrace complexity through the use of technology that will enable that. As simplicity and efficiency leads to a fragile systems that break into any disruption.
I just want to say, for the question's been coming up a lot, like what is the set of species we need to use, what's the arrangement, and I just want to point out that I really don't think there's one smart Foodscapes prescription that's going to work for every operation. It really just depends on what kind of resource deficits you have. Is it protein? Is it medicinal plants? Is it cover for wildlife? And then is it limited over space? Is it limited over time? What kind of scale your operation looking at? And depending on those factors, we have a wide variety of interventions that we could employ. So there's not, we kind of have to get away from the idea that there's just one size fits all prescription for this type of intervention.
Yeah, and I think that's and that's a complexity of these islands. The Foodscapes is like you can see this as like a recipe for that, but it gives the opportunity to producers like that to basically think about areas that may need restoration, or they may need some interventions, and then even producers like they may have their own ideas about species, and because I heard about that this particular species is good for the so, and then run, as I was mentioning yesterday, is like more into steps, like uh, like 5-10 year plans that you just move into that direction, not necessarily like just one shot, but in 5 or 10 year plans. So I think that's something that is a slow, like an incremental process. I think maybe to reach that complexity, that but you reach to that stage not from one day to the next. Yeah, it's an incremental process that is going to take time for sure.
We said that vision is super complex purposely, because that's what we create resiliency. But so with that systemic view, right? So we take the whole system all at the same time, but at the time of implementing or getting there, we literally go for a systematic approach. First thing first, what is, and some of the things, how we can make the life simple for the farmer or for the milker or for the herder to get that goal. And then, okay, well, now we got that. Okay, now we go to the next, right? Considering the first and the second, and then the third. So you slowly, or depending on the speed of the willingness of the farmer, and the willingness could be easy of life, could be other priorities on life or funding. Right? But yeah, so having a systemic view, but approach it systematically will give that thing that Horacio, what you were talking, that some sort of simplicity to not complicate their life of the one that is implementing it.
Yeah, let's. I think that coffee is ready for the break. Yeah, great discussion.
Hello, everybody. I would like to make an announcement. So, just to repeat, I'm a project evaluator, and I will invite you and encourage you to leave a feedback for the meeting. So I have a survey which I will ask everybody to complete right before lunch. But if you leave early, please come and take the link to the survey here at my table. See me. It will take you 5 minutes, and mostly there are questions about this meeting that we're here for today's, but there are a couple of questions about the project as a whole. So I would encourage you to respond to these questions as well. Thank you.
So is it possible to take get that on an email and do it later, or for some people, or is it?
Yes, so it's online survey. There's a link to the survey. Again, I would encourage you to take it before you leave. I have a link right here, but I will also send an email to people who are not here right now, so they will be able to take this. Yeah, yeah.
Great. Okay, so let's get some coffee and mid-morning breakfast. Hello, hello. So now let's start getting to the last last leg of the meeting on what's next. That's so we are creating a master plan for the future. I was just that's- so yes, we've been having a really great discussion, really productive, and now I think is that last, but not least, is the what's next, right? So that's so, and as Andres was mentioning, that the program still has flexibility for moving into directions that are not hugely different from what we had in the proposal, but still allows to create change and move the direction of the program based on the on these type of meetings, right? So on this, based on what we see, how we are experiencing the journey, and then from that is like, well, staying in that path, creating new paths. So one, that interaction with Stefan, I think, has been a good one in terms of creating, using the program as a platform for new things, right? Like new innovative approaches. But and that's you be from an advisory board, that'll be really, and also of course copy-eyes and students and everybody think about what, based on what you saw, things that you would like to see or into the future. I guess that's an open floor for this type of discussion. Need to break the ice. Any ideas or? Sure. Yeah, it's.
One thing that I really enjoyed about just this whole board meeting is getting to see how at the center of everything, what we're trying to do is make a better future for everyone. So keeping that at the center, whether it's trying to make healthier cattle or to expand mines, just always keeping that at the center, that we're doing this for the future so that we can live in that better world, and always connecting maybe like lesson plans and the purpose of why we're doing these crop rotations is so that we can have healthier environments and an ecosystem that works collaboratively to become more healthy. So keeping that at the center has been something great that I've seen the past few days, because I can tell how much everyone cares and how much progress is being made.
Jessica gave a shout out to the graduate students earlier, and I was remiss in not giving a shout out to the undergraduate students. Daniel worked with a drama professor here on campus to make strategic connections with drama for high school, because dance and music are not going to translate into high school lessons. So he has a theater minor, and he worked on those lessons. And also, as I mentioned, he has written and co-written and published some of the resource sheets through Extension. So great job for our undergraduates too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's so yeah, that's a really, and potentially moving into the future with that type of, as we've been visiting with Kathy on that, putting this particular approach on drama and theater into education, right, into the curriculum. So that'll be another innovative approach to this program into the future. Any other comments or ideas? Should that's All the same.
From my point of view, I would like to see not only to keep working with you guys in the next coming projects and so on, to have more of the students that we got there to have to come here and experience different contexts and vice versa. But one of the things that would be good is as you progress in time, whatever project comes after this, somehow need to be linked or a continuation to have a longer term um, view and approach to some of the innovations they are proposing this system. How the island will evolve in time, how those kids that we were seeing there dancing, will evolve in time. To kind of have a track on them, how the your theater lesson or whatever, how what is the impact, so and that may transcend the 5 years, but even if you get into other project, links to this or for this project be the base to other areas, I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, that's a great point, Paula. And then with people have been discussing this, and then the idea is that that is a really long-term project. This is not just that within the lifetime of 5-year project we can act for an extension, like 1-year extension. But so this is probably beyond the 6 years. So I think there's an opportunity to start thinking about, like we've been doing with Kathy and and then Stefan as well. Some people to keep moving this forward into a system that is that is just beyond the lifetime of the project. That's kind of the idea. So any ideas? Shrubs, I think, is one approach. Oh, that's. Oh, okay. That's. Also, you're pointing at. Okay, that's.
So one more comment. We just finished a big program in New Zealand. It's called Over Land and Water. It was 5 years, and then we were working with Maori as well. And all the iwis or the tribes of Maori, led by Tanui Campbell, have created a non-governmental organization to keep going with the work and keep working with the farmers, with the iwi, and not depending on governmental funding, but depend on philanthropists and private companies that are in tune with that to keep supporting mainly that education of farmers towards more sustainable futures.
Yeah, that's. Great. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Yeah.
So sitting here, I've been thinking about having an exercise, maybe at the next meeting, Juan. I was thinking about Pablo's presentation last night and all of the people that came together to create the plan to use out on the dairy farm in New Zealand. But what about an example ranch here? And I think about all the people and all the ranchers I work with and how hard it would be to actually do what we're talking about here. But if we did, what would we do? It would be interesting to me to listen to the education point of view of being incorporated into a landscape architecture. Think about the wildlife point of view, the actual grazing implications of what we need to have compared to what's actually available and what could we honestly get done. But we have a lot of GIS guys in here in this group. Anyway, what would we do and how would it look? A little bit bigger scale than just the university farm plot. If we were planning and we didn't need to worry about too many other restrictions, what would we say and how would it look?
So just, and Juan and I were having a conversation over here, so I'll just kind of throw it out a little broader, but I think our livestock industry right now is pretty industrialized. We build 4 fences, we dump cattle in it, and then we move them to the next 4 fences, the next 4 fences. And I mean, there are ways I think that this smart foodscapes could work within that model, but I do think that an important thing to think about, and maybe in some of your smaller trials to think about, is on a landscape. If you went back to more of a herder model, and we were talking about like Ashley's work with these collars, that kind of model, and you've used a herding model to blend these smart foodscapes into a landscape type management system. I think that's how it would be most successful. And in our mechanized world, probably you're not going to get a lot of herders. So that collar data, I think, is going to be really important on how best to use those collars, how best to move cows with those collars. And then if you can move them, in a nutritional sequence, I guess, across those nutrition patches. So I'd kind of encourage you to look at your small plots and how you're working with that. And don't think about 4 fences. Think about what's the nutrition on the landscape and how are we moving these cows, and are the collars feasible for that?
So I think one of the concerns that I would have about the management, and maybe this is the solution to it, but is the rest period. Because if cattle are drawn to the forbs and they're just able to go back and back and back, as they start to regrow, then it'll last just a year, like you'll take 2 to get it established and then 1 for it to be done. And so is it possible to keep the cattle moving so that the rest period, I think the question is, does it take longer than a year? Does it take the forbs longer to recover than the grasses? Plus they need a rest period where they're not growing in the fall, that kind of thing. So that complicates it, doesn't it?
So all grazing rotations are based on rest. And so that absolutely would have to be calculated in to that is what's the rest requirement for these species, and how does my rotation affect that rest? So yeah, I wouldn't suspect that they would go back to each patch every day. I would think they would hit a patch once and then move on to the landscape. And you're going to have to model that in your confined situation. And so would those collars provide that ability to okay, we're going to move sequentially, maybe in a clockwise circle around this pasture. We're going to hit that patch once. And we may not be on a highly nutritious patch for another 3 days. Then we'll hit the next patch once, and then we'll move on. And so a typical rangeland situation, you graze a pasture once, unless it's, has some unique water table or something like a meadow where you might be able to hit it a couple times. But yeah, I would suspect you'd hit each once and then move on.
Taylor mentioned, and then you, Travis, and to me, I think that one of the steps, I think also we visited with Eric about this on the next phase being, moving into large scales, moving up into scales, and then maybe having that being able to get into public land, and then trying to, with the basic information that we get from this program, hopefully if it's moving the way we think about it, trying to promote these interventions. I think that's the way that this program in the long run is going to be successful, is moving into larger scales, and then being possible to do this in public lands, where we just create almost like a restoration project, but with functional species that make sense for the animal and the environment, instead of just going into just a random selection of species, and then whatever is functional to the animal, right, as opposed to just focus on natives or non-natives. The main trust being the functionality to the landscape and to the animal. So, and I think creating or bringing together a group of, as you were mentioning, people with different expertise, and then creating this, like Pablo was mentioning yesterday, is like, well, working, being architects of this range landscape, and ways to, ponder all the constraints and benefits, and then doing like a workshop, that we can provide in this program, like a typical workshop where we meet and then brainstorm about all this, and then, well, Pablo can provide some of the learn experiences that he had.
¿Cuánto te puede costar? No, I think that's a good thing, and thank you for your comments of or your interest in what we've been doing. And this is a question that we've been getting in other places, as you know, Juan, from Saudi Arabia to Mongolia and those sort of things. The architecture of the systems, right? How you can architect a system fit for purpose. Well, the purpose is what we are talking about. And we have, in conjunction with Ian Gordon as well, create a methodology of a fast design set of workshops to get to the vision, the objectives, and with the information that is gathered, and it has been gathered in other projects, it would be great, and we would be quite happy to come and for a design workshop to get into that vision and setting up steps. Or at least set it in a way that can say, well, whenever we get the funding or the willingness of the land, you have the map set to head to that.
Sure. Yeah, right.
I guess I have some questions about kind of related to your guys' comments with the grazing management and thinking about, bringing people together, because it really, right, bringing people together, part of the value of that is really understanding the current situation of each community or landscape that you're going to try and engage with. And so I guess my question related to that is the real driver thinking about kind of the seeding approaches or the restoration or the techniques to get these plants out of the landscape? Because if that's already kind of packaged up and that idea is, formed, but there might be other approaches. And we were talking about this right yesterday on the walk back of all the different ways to get seed, or with the grazing management that there's an existing seed bank. And so, and then also what's the different impetus or drivers and funding sources? And that's going to be different for each kind of geographic area or each state. And so it might be thinking about more biodiverse landscapes. The driver might be climate goals. The driver might be sage grouse goals. It might be, whatever it is. And again, for each community, for each landscape, it's going to be a different driver. So being able to connect this concept, which is really amazing because it is comprehensive, it's very adaptable, it's very much just thinking about landscape, livestock, wildlife health in the big sense. And so the concept can go into any landscape, any community, and mesh, I guess, with their specific goals, objectives, funding sources. But yeah, I don't know. So that's kind of my question, I guess. Is it an open kind of approach to engaging, or is it our approach is we want to go seed legumes on pastures? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of beyond the species, that, or the seeding approaches. I think it's, as you say, so to be more like an holistic approach where we essentially look at the driver being the principles that probably we learn in this project, and then the idea of biodiversity, right? And then behind and then how we can create a template for. We know that all these systems are going to be different depending on the ecosite, what you are dealing with. but at the same time being able to show like a template, growing from the ground up, that creates that exercise of protocol essentially to work all together, and I know that the USDA in the last for the last year or two, they've been really focusing on this transdisciplinary research, right? That some people still don't know what transdisciplinary means, but it's like, it's not only the multidisciplinary scientists, but producers and land managers, people that are working on the ground, are kind of integrated in the whole decision making process. And that's a fairly new concept within the USDA, but that they're really pushing it really hard, because I think that's the way that things should be working on. With shared projects are about the same. It's like, well, producers or land managers having a really strong saying on, like Taylor was mentioning, right? So how we create this system where all these constraints and all this knowledge base that is not only coming from scientists or education people, but from people working actually on the ground. So I think creating this type of workshops, showing that this is a truly transdisciplinary effort, that this is what is kind of emerging now into science, will be really significant. And even we won't be able to create, systems for all ecosites even in the Western US, but at least like a template or a system of working transdisciplinary towards that objective. And this Smart Foodscapes project will be probably like one piece in the puzzle, but then we have all these other things that we've been discussing, through the project with people that are actually working on the ground with the real problems, right? That's kind of so to me, that'd be the ideal approach. And then if you can bring education to that, like getting people into college with internships, and even focusing on, we're working right now with the college in a program into engaging minorities, like underrepresentative groups of people, to get more opportunities for getting into college and all this. So supplementing all these ideas, creating also like a unity, I think will be really good. So that's Taylor, I think we're really on the money for that approach. I think we can propose, and this is an evolving thing. So it's not that we can propose, well, we'll do things this or that. It's like, well, we propose also to create workshops and brainstorming sessions with multiple participants, that deal with multiple issues, and then creating that, so the project being essentially creating a template for this type of transdisciplinary approaches, right? That's kind of the idea. So any other comments or?
So, I mean, Taylor, you're kind of talking about a WRI process is really what you're, right, in terms of looking at landscape. But from the extension side, as I think about this, if we try to sell it as like just a smart foodscape, right? Not in terms of, I mean, that's what the grant is, that's what the project is, and we're using it all. But for my end, that's a means to an end. And so really this is about creating a process for a landowner or a land manager to think through, to see, because Sebastian's talked about it, others talked about it, this isn't going to look the same on every landscape, on every ranch. So instead of trying to like give them a packaged, here's what you should do, it's more about, I mean, Dave and I have done this with, like, say, shrub treatments, and I almost hope we could get people to think about it from like a wildlife habitat standpoint, right? When you think about wildlife habitats, you think about, okay, where's the constriction in growing wildlife habitats? Is it, is it winter habitat? Is it summer? Is it, because the concept of the smart foodscape is we're going to provide whatever limiting factors in the landscape we're missing, right? The whole landscape architecture, providing that in a meaningful way, but that all has to be done on an individual basis. So it's more about creating a process to get them to think through, okay, so let's look at my operation. I've got cool season grasses, they mature at these dates, right? just help them start thinking about where's my bottleneck in nutrition? Do I have cows that aren't breeding back? Do I have, maybe my cows are breeding back, but maybe we're struggling in the spring and summer, so that you're meeting those limitations within a system. And then that also feeds into, okay, so wildlife on the landscape, where are they lacking? Are we missing pollinator forbs? So to me, it's more about creating, from the extension side, right, to promote this is more about creating a process to get them to think through their landscape individually, because I can't, from my desk in Logan, tell them exactly what, this, Taylor, you do this for a living. So you can't do that until you're on the ground with the producer, looking at all the stuff that's going on and consider the complexity. And they have to have some ownership in, they think it's going to work, which if they have no input in putting it together, it's not. So it's actually helped me think about this today, about part of the back end of this is all about, Sebastian's chapter just changed, by the way, providing a process, don't panic, Sebastian, to think through that process of how we would use, again, it's not just necessarily about a forward plot. It may be something entirely different, but the concept's the same. So I don't know if that.
Well, I just keep thinking of how you increase diet breadth altogether.
Yep, that's
all there is to it.
Well, yeah, but how you deliver that will then change based upon your needs.
Comments or?
Diet breadth. I grew up in Florida. I worked here doing grazing management in Utah. I remember growing up in Florida, we used to have to think about how to get our cows to eat everything else that's available and not just what they want. And so in the wintertime, we would feed, Matt and I were talking about feeding molasses and catfish oil. But we were doing that to get them to be able to consume all the other forage available out on the landscape and not just what was planted in pastures, because there was all sorts of other items available. And so that's what I'm saying, diet breadth, meaning the whole encompassing resource that is available to you to be able to find that variety of nutritional sources and just making use of it. I think we have that here in a lot of places on our rangelands. We were talking about it on our mountains, like, good night, we've got all sorts of stuff. We could have them go graze. I don't know that we always need to worry about trying to find an island of nutrition that we're kind of worried about it, whether or not it'll actually establish. Yeah, there's all sorts of available items to us. We just have to figure out how to make use of it. I work with other producers who their minerals and it's not just having a lick block that you might throw out, but one of my producers has a big, huge skid, and he has it partitioned into about 10 different little sections that a cow can go in and lick the specific mineral that they need at the time, instead of just a salt block that you hope has enough of something in it. Right. And so they're having that, I don't know, in Juan's world, you talk about post-ingestive feedback, right? Or you'd have the sense the animal knows what they need, and so they go and lick whatever they need to get. And so I'm thinking about it as if we had a practice on a imaginary ranch. If our room right here was sitting and looking at developing a project together, how would it look? If we were using a chunk of ground here in Utah, it would be different than in New Zealand, but it would be looking at what we have available and what already grows well out there, and seeing if there's maybe a way to make some changes if we need to, but hopefully making better use of the breadth was that word that I was using, but the overall available resources that we already have that grow, and we don't have to worry about trying to plant and keep it established for a little while. Yeah.
So Taylor, you're just talking about from the cow's point of view. And if we were on that same plot of land, we would also think about the other things we want to manage for besides cow productivity. So is there a stream there? Are there sage grouse there? What are the other ecosystem values that we're managing for? And so finding the bottlenecks, which Eric had mentioned, and incorporating that into whatever our island is going to be encompassed in our island. Is there habitat we're planting out to. So it's the blending of those things on the landscape. And then if it's not just our group, but if it's actually on a rancher's piece of land, it's actually asking them what they value on their own piece of land. What are the things that they want to restore and improve?
You're hungry. Pretty hungry.
Oh, I get the. I'll hand it to somebody.
Yeah, there is consumption of different things that we don't typically stress worrying about, I guess. And so whether it is sagebrush, rabbit brush, and we've had cattle eat rabbit brush, we just have to kind of train them to it. And rabbit brush has all sorts of dirty words linked to it, but you also have some good uses for it. You don't want me to say, ma'am. But we spent a lot of time trying to kill that stuff. Anyway, we
It's an increaser species, so it doesn't get as much utilization, so it will come up and deplete grasses.
So Bree mentioned a wildlife biologist that used to do a lot of work on a big private ranch up and over the mountain, south of where I live. And Chris and I had collars, just GPS collars on cows. And it is not apparent to a naked eye looking at the behavior of cattle grazing out on this ranch. But we were noticing, using the old ranch manager sitting with us looking at this collar data, that 20 years after a chemical treatment was done to reduce the dominance of sagebrush, the same animals that were not around 20 years prior are still targeting the chemically treated acres more heavily than the other acres that are available to them within pasture boundaries. And another thing that we saw behavior wise was that animals still had their preference areas that they'll go to first. Even when you think that you're highly managing a rangeland setting, they're still going to go to a preference area first. They're going to go eat along a stream first. It's all about the throwing management on top of it, so you can't let him do that where it's a detriment to you in the long term. So, I don't know that we're going to be able to change a whole lot of behavior, but again, we're thinking about just adapting our management to what our bottleneck areas are. At least I'm kind of talking in the Utah world of grazing and Intermountain West world, but there's lots of behavior things, and whether it's eating something that we don't realize that they're eating, or getting some benefit out of plants that we're not thinking that our animals are stressing to go after, they are. No, we're all lazy. We all want what we want. Yeah, that's right. Over the mountain. Yeah. A little tiny town in Randolph, Utah, on the Wyoming line. So.
He brings up a good point about minerals and the value. And, sometimes you see the horses chewing on fences. They're trying to get minerals wherever they can get it. And I think sometimes that is overlooked. And I like your idea of, what did you say, doing minerals in different portions, or let the cows choose where they go?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that again?
So it's not my own personal livestock, but one of the producers I work with, they have just a homemade sled built, and they buy different micronutrients, minerals in bulk in bags, and then they pour a specific type of mineral in one of the little blocks. And then it's designed, the cows have learned to be able to just lift up a big old rubber flapper that protects it from the rain, but cows go in and lick whatever specific mineral they're after, whether it's selenium or you know, whatever it be, you know, straight salt, you know, it's whatever they need at the time. And but it's what their body needs is what they're craving, instead of just going after one block that you hope has everything. It's kind of the same idea with food or foraging.
When Morton, you know, came out with rain, it rains and it pours, you know, and they start doing these lick blocks, and they took all the minerals out, and pretty soon they had all these problems. Cows with limps and losing legs, and babies deformed. They go, what did we do wrong? It was because they lack of minerals. So it's very, very powerful, very important. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's your dream demonstration ranch?
Workshops, or that's the way you started, right? Workshops. We first we put what we call a design team, very heterogeneous, different components from scientists, academics, industry. So we put a core team with different components from science, academics, industry, and representatives of the government, if you like, or something like that, to discuss what we were up to, and then did a little bit of a review of the literature to evaluate the context of the general needs, and then we started with the workshops to determine what were the stakeholders in particular for that particular situation, and then discussing about primary, secondary, and tertiary needs. And then, you know, after get into that, you get into what are the solutions that we can put together, what are the trade-offs, what is the low-hanging fruit that could be the first step, and so on. So it pretty much we use, you know, and I'm learning as we go. We are all learning as we go. And design thinking and design methodology, you know, under the umbrella of system thinking. So there is several methodologies. There is a Dutch methodology, there is a French methodology, and with the pros and cons, and then we evaluated all of those design methodologies through design thinking, and we create a short and sweet set of steps to follow to get to a particular contextualized prototype of a farm. You know, we have done that as well with different sort of farms. One dryland farm, which is beef and sheep, that we are not implementing it because pretty much the university asked us to focus in the dairy farm. We have also have and that could be quite useful for you, design for a high country of mountains, would look quite similar to here, but what we implement, we got the design for that. So, but I don't know if I'm answering your question, Juan, but yeah.
And then the idea of all these different diverse shrubs and species with secondary compounds that came also from producers, or that was something that you introduced to the those part of the scientific contribution, I guess, to the group, right? Or
yeah, that's perfect comment, Juan, and question. That came like a tool. Right? What was the, you know, what if we look at the cow as a stakeholder, right? What the cows want. Okay, the cow is not grazing to make you
make money. The cow's grazed because she's hungry, and then she need to be healthy, and she need to blah blah blah. And then you get into a point that say, well, how can I provide her something that not only nourish her but also help as a bioremediation of particular needs or problems she may have. So the science and the information became a tools to solve that particular need or problem. Well, and it was really hard for us, as a scientist, that we maybe been working for years in some of those things, creating that tool to leave that apart and discuss on the issues and the need, and just say, okay, well, this is a tool we are going to use in this particular system for that particular need. Not simply because you've been working many years on one thing, you need to force it to apply it there. So that was a massive learning process for us as well, and it was reflected in the fruitful discussions in those in those workshops. Like, say, hold on, yeah, we know, like, so much about that, but let's not force it. Let's focus on the real problem and the real need. And things emerge there, and there are some things that say, well, that's cool, but not now. It may be later, once this and this happen first. So from a chemical point of view, if you like, you can argue that in the particular case of a pretty intensive system like a dairy farm, we needed to incorporate those chemicals. We needed to incorporate or biodiversify that system. You saw the picture, it was a desert of ryegrass. And like in this particular case, is Juan as well, when you got these massive rangelands of only grasses, you have to intervene, or to create those. In our high country station, because of you, Juan, as well, we first did, and I think Jennifer was a co-author of that paper as well, the chemoscape. So we mapped the whole landscape from a chemical point of view, well, first taxonomically and then chemical point of view. And then we detect that different part of the landscape have different part of properties in a three-dimensional way. And then these students did that in a four-dimensional way and see how those different locations in that rangelands, the mountains change from a chemical point of view. And then you overlay particular grazing management, we call for DHD, four-dimensional high definition, making the animals navigate through that part according to the particular needs. Let's say, okay, well, the sheep are lambing, they may need some anti-inflammatory thing, right? So you don't force it to do that, you just offer the context. So, and now with the virtual fencing we were talking this morning, so you know the landscape, or they know the landscape as well, but you can enable that to say, well, I know that during this month you guys are all going to be lambing, so let me locate you in a particular refuge where you can have plants that you can use to self-medicate. So it's a sort of island point of view, or sort of creating those islands as well through management.
Yeah, so to me, it seems like this group advisory board meetings, so it'll be like creating one from the beginning of the project, of the new project, and then getting all that design and feedback from that meeting. So like more like a workshop than an annual meeting. Yeah, and then following up on this with meetings and see how the way that the system is moving, but then creating a group that actually is starts from the beginning, from the concept, from the inception of the project. Yeah, that's
that's a perfect. And in our case, and we learn as we go. It took us 40 years to learn how to deal with this. The first design we put together for the high country, there were 30 people all giving an opinion. It was quite democratic. And, we found out that the second year we've been workshopping for 2 years and we end up yet with nothing. So a lot of ideas without much of an order there. So and that's why for the particular case of a dairy farm or the other farm, we say, well, we pick representatives of particular industry, the government, the scientists, or expertise. So to create a core design team that can make the things happen and faster and create on that core, let's say, week of design, you can create their satellite workshops previous to that week of design or after that to supplement some of the questions that may arise from that. Yeah. So yeah.
More comments or just wrap up? Yeah, so I think that's something to think about. Hopefully, everybody from this room will get that in the back of their minds as we are moving forward on this. So we just wrap. Any other final comments or?
I just wanted to reiterate again about the dissemination of the education piece. It's got to be, you've got great stuff for a couple of schools, but we need to get it out to the broader audience. So whether it's a website, easy to navigate, or maybe even searchable, where we can move this forward with all of the pieces that you're creating is really important.
Hopefully we can partner with Ag in the Classroom and piggyback on what they already have. They already have a system that's searchable and browsable. But if not, we need our own too for our own resources. Yeah, website. Yeah.
Well, we have one, right? So it's the idea of trying to. Oh, a different one. Okay. Oh, okay. So that's a good. That. Okay. So.
We talked about this over and over again about it residing with extension. So all of our resources there for maintenance and longevity.
So great. Then you think another website or going.
Let them take over our website. Well, they're excited. I mean, there are other examples. Somebody has to take on.
I guess a question, what happened to the Ag in the Classroom? There's a national Ag in the Classroom. So why don't we put it there instead of on?
We've had conversations. We have good relationships with them. And professionals.
So it's a time issue too, because any of us that have done websites or websites designs, it's very time consuming. So if you say Ag in the Classroom has somebody that does web development and they're doing web development for Ag in the Classroom, they may not have time in their schedule to take on a whole nother project and a whole nother website. So it's going to be a time issue, and how you're going to pay that person, right? And these web developers now, as AI has come on board, have become very valuable people. They're hard to find now, right? They're hard to find. And anybody that's done coding, computer coding, you're in GIS, it's really boring. And people really don't like doing it. So, it would be kind of like, learning a foreign language and then just doing that foreign language all the time. It's not really exciting work either. So there is an issue with, with websites and ownership and paying So it'd be a matter of talking to people to see who's willing to take it on, I guess.
Great. So any more comments or before we just, I think that lunch is ready, or is it ready? They're bringing, okay. So, and then, yeah, the reminder on the survey, that'll be really important. Yeah. Also distribute that.
Put your phone there like you do with the menus in the restaurants right now. So I have a QR code, so you can do it on your phone. I don't have a one for everybody, but I mean, it takes a second to just use your phone to. Also, I have a few paper copies. If anybody wants to use a paper copy, you can just distribute that. I think for our table, one is probably enough. Okay, here are a few QR codes. Let me know if you need a paper copy. I have some.
Okay. Thank you. No, I can just do it. Or do you want us to do it right now?
Whatever.
I'm sure I'll do it. I will do it.
Letter for the import. No.
And thank you so much for leaving your feedback. It's very valuable for the project when you respond to the survey.
Great. So we are finishing up. Yeah, big round of applause for everybody that participated. I think it's been for a very productive meeting. Yeah. And then, yeah, there's lunch for either here or for people that need to go or leave, or we already have that lunch to go, right? That's
I thought you gave them to your team. That's what I was gonna say. What kind of deal did you get?
I've been vegetarian since 1970. Oh, wow. Probably longer than you've been alive. Yeah. Yeah. I started eating fish in 1986.
Everyone, I just wanted to say thanks.
Something comes up.
We're going to go and visit it. Because we're not booked in for the hotel. No, we're going to Grand Junction. You know what I'm doing?
Oh, that's right. Because it's Memorial. That's right. Monday's Memorial Day. Yeah, yeah. People are leaving. A lot of people are leaving tomorrow. Yeah, because it's a long weekend. Junction. What is
Yeah, it's not coming translation. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I made a really good French when we were using him and his wife. We have managed to. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we are several private ranches. And then we are going to meet with Jimmy Howell in Boulder, and they are going to take us to Sugar Ranch. Like a visual, you know, visual technique.
These were gorgeous. The guy from Argentina was like, you know what's wrong? You eat a lot of sugar. And the guy was like, Nutella. We ate a lot of like that. And the guy was just he was see, like, and then it's like, yeah, you eat a lot of carbohydrates. The guy was just bread that we usually have. Yes, that was it was something else. It's like, oh, there's a lot of things. That's true. And then yeah. It's all about intervening in that report, right? Suppose what can better skills, what can you learn? Not just thinking, going there and then yeah, the little things that's right. And then what can we learn from each other, and that's because it's true, you know, there's really a lot of theory on that. They seem like there's more like a family tie, environment. they also see, you know, that.
Like they've accepted our offer. You're eating keto?
Yeah, maybe having someone.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so they did accept our offer, but it's like all that other stuff. We get solar house.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
Yeah, and we're doing a thing.
Is that sort of the North American grass-fed family farm show?
Well, they have this. Yeah, I mean, there's, it's It's actually not a bad deal. So basically, we had to send in all these pictures the other day. And they'll give us what they estimate. For house people, quite a bit. Got it. So they'll give us that down. And then we sell our house. Yeah, yeah. So it's like essentially they're giving us a short-term loan. It's not that crazy. It's like I know. I mean, I guess it's just because it's so bad. Like they give you 180. Back behind that. Yeah, you drive right by it. It's on that main street. Is that 1500? 60? Yeah. So if you're going towards North Logan, say coming from Preston, from the right before the park, you take a right. And our really new house is like 2 blocks up. Like only one house away from the park. It doesn't actually have grass in the backyard, which I'm happy of. It's like boulders and there's really good trees and landscaping. So like we don't have to take care of the yard. So are you on behind it? Yeah, it would be like but not directly. Probably right by it. A lot of those places, a lot of those houses do their garden. This one, yeah. So it's funny, when we brought this house that we thought we were going to live in for a while. My mother-in-law was like, this is going to be the nicest landscaping you'll ever have. And it was really beautifully like timed flowers. And I'm just laughing because this house actually doesn't have I know. I never thought of it. Internet's not bad, but it's just on like that little loop there. Yeah, that. It's huge. Yeah. I don't know. They have baseball. Playground. They don't have a ton of like. I know. It's tons of green space. Yeah, but our kids are just soccer right now, so tennis courts. Yeah. Yeah. I'm starting to play pickleball. Hey, how did?
Thank you for everything. Really interesting times. Lots of stuff to think about. It's great seeing the kids drinking it in. I'm not sure how much it's synchronized. I wonder why you did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Three Texas.
Yeah.
Papa's got a couple of he's studying his supervisor.
Oh, yeah. Really? Okay. Yeah, good. You know that, yeah. What emerges as being interesting. So, yeah.
Finally found something good to do with those crossings.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I gotta run. We're trying to get our Bear Lake presentation ready for Saturday. So like, yeah, yeah. See you next. We have a meeting scheduled, right? Okay. You are cool. Okay. Here you Yeah. Yeah, let's put it from Adam and Matt.
Thank you.
There's the building. This is the parking lot. And this is the entrance.
Mismo.
Stay in touch. Okay? Yeah, just let me know if one misbehave. No, he's too. Yeah, let's stay in touch. You never know, you may end up there. And you hope.
Yeah.
You do what you need to have it going.
So we are leaving. Thank you very much.
You write it down?
Nice to meet you. I'll be in touch with you. Visit you.
Yeah, please do. So once we've got all my details.
Give you a card with buddies. Yeah, I love when
Would any of you eat a vegetarian sandwich?
Don't email me. Just pick up the phone.
Okay, excellent.
Bye-bye. Okay. See you. Yeah. Good. Well, good luck and yeah, good to see you as well.
Zubair, you gonna take some of the, they're gonna take some leftovers? There's some vegetarian sandwiches over there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy.
Hey, I have a question. What happens when you eat it?
Oh, exactly. Engineering, exactly. So it's well, I'm an engineer by my own yeah, well, good. Things are changing way faster than we would like. So we need to change. Well, to make it change, sometimes you need to be poking the bear. Sometimes create those uncomfortable. Well, we were talking with one. I'm taking off. I just to meet you.
I'm hoping, planning on being out 25.
Okay.
On the Congress, so I'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Makes sense, but I just will stop on the way home.
Oh, yeah, that feels that would be, I would feel okay.
I'm going to Australia. Oh, you're my 50th wedding.
Congratulations. When is that? I'll be in touch.
Yeah, please do.
Really good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
For about 3 years, I'm gonna finally put a face and.
Good, and you owe me a hat.
I owe you a hat. I will get you a hat. I promise.
So as you work with Juan, maybe the same thing like you're doing feeling only here in Utah, right? Because there are a lot of well, it wouldn't be science.
I invited you to. My last couple.
Will do. All right.
Without pushing. No, it's there. The third group.
Yeah, it is.
You're not gonna publish a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's about publication.
Exactly. It's really rewarding.
Well, you learn more than you think. That's what I found. I have learned. Really?
But I better go. I need to check out.
Yeah, good luck and have a safe road trip. I hear you're driving all the way.
It's gonna be fun.
It will be fun, but wow.
Yeah, we're between Binghamton and
Collaborative research effort. As
I'm sure it's gonna catch up to me and somebody's gonna say.
It would help them to have a cross-disciplinary collaboration. So he's asking if we would want to collaborate.
Oh, you are not done. Oh, really good to meet you.
And we're good at it.
It's on my list.
We've got a writing system. We're great at collaborating,
As you can tell. We got it.
and we enjoy it.
We like to write.
We enjoy it. Yeah. Yeah.
Or like if you see any other ways where you can contribute, even a tiny piece, just let us know. But I'd love to work there.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's cross connections with the identity. So that's what I do. So we can look at producer identity.
Right.
And how does the producer's identity as whatever
I think he's not wanting to do a whole other study.
No, I know, but he's looking at identity. Often in their survey, you're looking at why are they, aren't you? Somewhat, you mentioned in your talk that it's, you're finding that whether the producer wants to adopt or not, so we have identity.
Yeah.
Exactly. For everybody, even those who are writing.
You heard when you were in you heard
Yeah.
those kids.
We have not done that. So how do you measure student engagement?
They were looking at what birds they saw.
Observation.
That's a plan.
We did write everything, or if you see any opportunity.
I think we can connect there.
Well, right now we're swamped with data. You know, we've got, our surveys are so long. She was suggesting
If you want to buy it for people, that's what they want. That's what they want from us. They want that's not
Well, they're definitely engaged.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, we could do like what percent, where you just go. Time on task.
Ask any teacher.
I am motivated. How do I increase motivation? See, where do we start? Maybe go to bed at night. Yeah, but yeah, that's, so my you pick a research program. So, you know, I can see from what they're picking, it's the same thing. I want students to be that's what those are the reasons. I want students to be more motivated. So those are the kinds of things that they pick for Japanese questions. So they're all picking, like she's saying, they're all picking the same. Oh, I mean, I don't tell them at all. I don't give them any direction. So they're coming up with this stuff on their own, and it's following a pattern. Doesn't matter what group it is.
I have a question. If you know the answer, I don't know if you because I've done a lot of work with project So now I'm using this phrase, and I'm wondering how, because I heard this yesterday. And I wondered how to put it, because I hear some.
Okay, so place-based, okay.
Well, I would say good project-based learning is place-based.
But
Because
they
it-
aren't
because
the
it makes the
same.
connection
Yeah,
to
they're
their
not the same. Yeah, because with place-based learning, you don't have to necessarily do a project for investigating.
True.
Okay.
So, yeah,
You don't.
yeah, it's like it'd be a Venn diagram, right? You got the project-based learning and you got the place-based learning, and there's a good overlap. You could have projects that are place-based.
So how are these different?
Well, place-based is where their projects are focused on where they live. So a rainforest project-based learning unit would not count as place-based unless they lived in the rainforest.
Right.
Okay.
So something related to that.
Right, right.
And what the phrase, project-based learning program, what actually are trying to do.
Right, right. Yeah. In order to make it relevant to the students, often it is place-based.
Well, there's overlap, but they're different.
Right, right. There's overlap.
If it's not a project, if it's not a project.
I would say project-based learning would come under place-based learning. Place-based learning is totally different.
Okay, so.
Because in place-based learning,
What's an example of place-based learning that isn't project-based?
I could look at, like, I've seen people look at, they just get, like, they get data from their local hospital, and they're looking at disease infection in their community. That's not necessarily a project or a problem.
Well, I mean,
You know, they're just, you know, kind of investigating where they live, what is the purpose, whatever.
Are you looking at it from
You know.
like institute model of project-based learning where it's all the steps? Okay. So I would say that, you know, you could do portions of those steps.
Right.
With a place-based unit, it wouldn't be what I would consider a project,
Yeah.
you know, where you would have the full picture. Yeah. it's okay.
Oh, place-based learning. Obviously.
Well, it should.
Well, if it's done properly, it would be definitely. A lot of times, place-based learning includes, which I love, some kind of community survey, you know, looking at stakeholders, things like that. It's almost like science education with a sociology. It's sociology.